Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about why it is important for the natural lifter, the drug-free lifter, to chase performance-based goals and numbers if they want to see positive changes in muscle mass and body composition. And there's several reasons for this, and what people need to understand, I'm not saying that chasing a pump, I'm not saying that working harder or doing your drop sets or whatever it is that you might be doing isn't going to facilitate muscle growth. I'm not saying that that's the case. So let's get that out of the way up front. What I am saying is that without an objective comparison of numbers, weight used, reps done over time, that the natural lifter actually has no other tools available to determine if they are gaining muscle, and if so, how quickly are they potentially gaining it, particularly in different areas of their body. Your numbers are the only objective way that you have to track progress. And the reason for this is multifold in nature. Number one, gaining muscle is a very, very slow process, particularly after you get through that first few months of noob gains. And someone who's not using any drugs or anything. And in fact, even with drugs, it can get very, very slow at a certain point. But gaining muscle is a slow process in the body, and it's very slow. And oftentimes, even if you are gaining muscle at the maximum rate possible, you might not be gaining enough to see significant changes in the mirror, and in some cases, even significant changes on the scale. And that's a very important point to consider. You might not be able to track if you are changing because it's such a slow process, particularly once you've been training hard for about 8 or 9 months and it starts to really slow down, it becomes very difficult. The other thing is that our own perception can be very subjective, particularly people who get exposed to the online fitness world. If you get exposed to the online fitness world, your perception of what's an acceptable physique, what's an acceptable amount of muscle mass, how you look compared to others is going to be distorted. When you factor in how many people develop body image disorders and at least mild cases of muscle dysmorphia who train, determining your progress trying to use a mirror is going to be very, very difficult, and in some cases very frustrating. But what you have to remember is that weight on the bar used with the same form, or being able to increase workload on an exercise, is a guaranteed method of gaining muscle. And I don't mean what some people think, oh, you're just talking about chasing numbers and powerlifting. No, I'm not. Because as you guys note, I discuss even for powerlifters, strict technique, longer ranges of motion, pause work, things like that to put muscle mass and strength on. All right, all this other stuff that powerlifters do to increase their maxes is purely to use extra technique and to do well in comp. That's not how you build up muscles. And if you don't build up your muscles, you're not going to be anywhere near as strong as you can be, even for a strength athlete. So let's throw that to the side. I'm not talking about 1 rep maxes. I'm not talking about using leverages and finding ways to cheat to lift weights. I'm talking about you coming in and just talk about stuff like chest and biceps, all right? Let's not even talk about powerlifting movements. Let's talk about stuff aesthetic guys care about. Delts, your chest, your triceps. I'm talking about getting stronger on your pause bench, where you pause on the chest and lock it all the way at the top of full range of motion bench press. I'm talking about on your work sets. In other words, if you use the exact same technique on your bench press, and you are able to do 155 pounds with perfect clean form for 10 reps. We'll get into that hypertrophy range everyone needs to talk about all the time for some reason. 10 reps, right? Most people are going to agree 10 reps on big compound movements with full ranges of motion and no cheating is a good way to gain muscle. I don't think any expert, any bodybuilder, any coach is going to disagree with that. So let's use that. If you go from being able to bench press 155 pounds on the bar for 10 reps, and you get strong enough to bench 205 pounds with that same form, the same technique, the same range of motion for 205 pounds, it's biologically impossible. All right, it is biologically impossible for your pectorals, your anterior delts and your triceps to not have grown at least some. All right, it is impossible. The laws of human biology, physiology, and exercise science will tell you it is not possible for you to have stayed the same size in those muscles. They will have grown. Flat out, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. They will grow from that. So if we are continually moving towards progressive overload, that's the only tool and protocol that we have to ensure that the natty is growing and gaining muscle mass. Now, people say, well, I like to do this. I like to do these drop sets for my curls to make my biceps grow. I get this amazing pump and they burn. And you know what? If you enjoy doing that and you recover from doing that and you feel it's a productive method of training your biceps, okay. I'm not going to disagree with you. How do you judge if it's working or not? Because that pump doesn't tell you if it's actually working or if you've grown from it. You're creating extra metabolic fatigue. Let's say you're curling the 40-pound dumbbells to failure. Then you drop to the 30s and train those to failure. Then you drop to the 20s, and then you drop to the 10s, and you're doing a drop set. You get that deep burn in that pump. You're trying to induce extra metabolic fatigue in the muscle, right? Well, we know that metabolic fatigue absolutely contributes to muscle growth, all right? That fatigue that you build up from doing that can actually contribute to muscle growth. I'm not going to say that that's bro science. There's data on that. There's a reality to that, right? That fatigue can contribute to the amount of muscle that you gain. So how do you determine if it worked? How do you determine if you've actually gained muscle? By how much you can still curl. In other words, when you go to do a 40-pound dumbbell later, if you've been doing this for a couple months, and you can only do 6 really strict reps with the 40-pound dumbbell, but now you find after a couple months of using this method that you can do 9 or 10 strict reps with that same dumbbell, did your biceps get stronger? Yes. If they got stronger, then they grew. Specifically when you're doing rep work. When you start doing rep work, if your strength with good form increases, the amount of weight you can use with good form in the same form increases, or taking a weight that it was hard for you to do 6 or 7 reps and you can now do 9 or 10, and those first 6 or 7 are pretty easy, your bicep got stronger. If your bicep got stronger from doing this, you will have grown. It will be bigger. Now, if you've been doing this protocol for a couple months, and when you grab that strict curl with that 40-pound dumbbell, if you haven't gotten stronger, you're still only able to do 6 reps or 7 reps or whatever it is you were doing a couple months ago, or you can't step up to a 42.5-pound dumbbell, you probably have not caused significant muscle growth in that bicep. All right, it might be time for you to either say, okay, I'm really advanced, so I'm growing really, really slow. If you've been training, 3 or 4 years, okay. Particularly if you're completely natty, 3 or 4 years, okay, that might be reasonable. But if you've been lifting a year and you take an exercise like that you care about, because you wouldn't be doing these triple, quadruple drop sets if you didn't care about your biceps growing, right? That's obviously your goal. Well, if you can't increase tension and workload on the muscle after a couple of months, whatever you are doing isn't working. That is why the progressive overload is a valuable tool to know if you are growing or not. And I'm not saying you always have to be increasing the weight to know that you're going to force growth. I mean, your workload can do that. You can add reps and sets and volume and everything to induce growth with the same weight. But if the amount of work you can do with good form on a muscle hasn't increased, either with the tension you can do or amount of reps or something you can do, if that muscle hasn't gotten stronger, I can almost guarantee you that it hasn't gotten bigger. If you're completely clean, that's how it works. That's how it works across the board. And so by continually noting that we are getting stronger, it gives us the ability to know with certainty if we are growing or not. Because if we are getting stronger, we are gaining muscle. If we are not getting stronger, we are not gaining muscle. And that's a very easy way to assess it, and kind of the point that people need to make, because the look in the mirror can be subjective. The look in the mirror can vary on the amount of water you're holding day to day. The look in the mirror can vary on how much body fat you're holding. It's not going to tell you if you're gaining muscle. But we go back to the other point. We could make the same argument for weight and the scale, because you know what? If your scale isn't going down at least a little bit, you're probably not losing very much body fat as a natural, because naturals don't grow into a bodybuilding show. In other words, you don't go on a cut and lose 15 pounds of fat and replace it with 15 pounds of muscle unless you just started out and you're in your first year in the gym. That never, ever, ever, ever happens for naturals. So in other words, unless you're doing a very ultra slow recomp, which means you aren't losing significant fat, the scale's not going down, you're probably not losing fat, unless you're in your first few months of very hard lifting. And that would be the exception to the rule. Or you've detrained a long time and you've come back and you're regaining off muscle memory. So the same thing, we could argue that changes in scale weight is absolutely critical for naturals when they're even chasing body composition. Weight on the bar, weight on the scale, it matters. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.